The morning sun peeked through the curtains as 16-year-old Emma adjusted the strap of her worn-out piano bag and stepped out of her small house. Her hands trembled slightly, not because of the cold weather, but because today was the day she had been waiting for. Today was her big audition, a chance to prove that all the late nights of practice, all the blisters on her fingers, and all the sacrifices she had made were worth it. The city was buzzing as she walked toward the grand hall. Her shoes clicked against the pavement, echoing her nervous heartbeat. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she kept reminding herself why she was doing this. Emma loved music more than anything else. The piano was not just an instrument for her. It was her voice, her way of speaking when words failed. As she reached the tall building where the competition was being held, she paused at the entrance. The glass door shimmered in the morning light, and the sound of other contestants warming up drifted from inside. She could hear the sharp notes of violins, the powerful chords of cellos, and the confident runs of other pianists for a moment. Emma wondered if she really belonged there. These were children from wealthy families, trained by the best teachers, wearing clothes that spoke of privilege and polish. She, on the other hand, wore a plain dress her mother had ironed with care, and shoes that had seen better days. But Emma's mother had kissed her forehead before she left home and whispered, "Play with your heart, my girl. That's something money can't buy." Those words echoed in her mind and gave her the courage to push the heavy door open and step inside. The hall was even more magnificent than Emma had imagined. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above her. Rows of red velvet chairs lined the audience section, and on the stage sat a grand piano that looked like it belonged in a royal palace. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, her fear melted into awe. She had never seen anything so beautiful, and knowing she would touch those keys made her heart race. Contestants lined up along the walls, some stretching their fingers, others flipping through sheet music with serious expressions. Emma found a quiet corner and opened her bag. She pulled out her music sheets, carefully smoothed the creases, and whispered the notes under her breath. Her hands were cold, so she rubbed them together, hoping no one would notice the slight shake in her fingers. Suddenly the announcement came, "Next, Emma Turner, piano. Please be ready." Her heart skipped a beat. Her name echoed in the grand hall, making it feel more real, more frightening. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward the stage. Each step across the wooden floor felt like a drum beat inside her chest. When she reached the piano, she placed her music on the stand and slowly sat down. The lights above her were bright, making her feel both exposed and important. She adjusted the bench, rested her hands on her lap for a second, and closed her eyes. In that silence, she remembered the nights she had practiced in her small living room, the candle burning low because they couldn't always afford electricity. She remembered how her little brother had clapped every time she finished a song, and how her mother had stood in the doorway smiling even when she was tired from work. All those memories gave her strength. Emma lifted her hands and placed them gently on the piano keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingertips, like a secret waiting to be told. The hall grew quiet, and for a moment, she forgot about the judges, the audience, and the competition. All she felt was the music inside her, ready to pour out. But just as she began to play the first few notes, her eyes flicked toward the judge's table. That was when she saw him. The man at the center, the senior judge, stared at her with an expression as cold as ice. His sharp gaze seemed to cut through her confidence, his lips pressed into a thin line, and his posture was rigid. Unlike the other judges, who scribbled politely on their notepads, he sat there unmoving, his hands folded neatly as though he had already made up his mind about her. Emma's throat went dry. She swallowed hard and forced her focus back onto the piano, telling herself to breathe, to trust the music. She pressed the first chord and the sound echoed across the hall, soft but steady. It was her moment, the moment she had dreamed of, and though her legs trembled under the bench, her fingers continued to dance over the keys. At that instant, Emma wasn't just a nervous teenager anymore. She was a storyteller, a girl who carried her family's hopes, her own dreams, and a love for music too strong to be silenced. And no matter how cold the judge looked, she promised herself she would not let fear steal her song. The senior judge sat in the center of the long, polished table, his back perfectly straight, his suit pressed without a single wrinkle. His name was Judge William Harding, but among students and teachers, he was known simply as the Cold Judge. He had earned that title over years of competitions, never smiling, rarely offering praise, and often cutting performers short if they failed to impress him within the first minute. The other judges shifted in their seats, flipping pages on their clipboards and whispering to each other occasionally. But William remained as still as stone. His sharp eyes scanned the contestants one after another, watching their every movement with a kind of detached calculation. His face gave away nothing, no kindness, no cruelty, only a sense of strict control. It was the face of a man who had locked his emotions away a long time ago. What no one in the hall knew was that William had once loved music with all his heart. Years ago, he had sat beside a piano often, not as a player but as a listener. His wife Margaret had been the true musician. She had played for him every evening, filling their home with melodies that wrapped around his soul like a warm blanket. But after her death, he could no longer bear to hear those same notes. The music that once brought joy now only reminded him of everything he had lost. So he built a wall inside himself, a wall that kept out both pain and beauty, and people began to call him cold. As Emma sat down at the piano, William adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly. He had already decided she was another nervous teenager, just one of many who would walk onto that stage and play songs they did not fully understand. To him, these young performers often lacked depth. They played notes but not feelings, sounds but not soul. He believed talent was rare and discipline even rarer. When Emma's trembling fingers touched the keys, William's hand twitched as if to wave her off. He had little patience for hesitation. He wanted precision, confidence, and mastery from the very first note. Anything less in his mind was a waste of time. The first few notes of Emma's chosen piece floated through the hall, soft and shaky. William's expression hardened further. He scribbled a quick mark on his score sheet and cleared his throat. The sound echoed loudly in the silent hall, and Emma's heart nearly stopped. She looked up briefly, catching the icy stare of the judge, and her breath faltered. "Stop," William said firmly. His voice was deep and clipped, the kind of voice that left no room for argument. The sound sliced through Emma's music like a blade. She froze, her hands hovering above the keys, her face burning with shame. The audience gasped softly, shocked by how quickly he had dismissed her. But William showed no sign of hesitation. For him, it was simple. If a performer could not capture his attention within seconds, they did not deserve more of his time. The girl's shoulders slumped, and William felt a faint tug of guilt deep in his chest. But he ignored it. He had silenced far more confident players in the past. What was one more? Yet as he glanced at her, something in her wide, tear-filled eyes made him pause for just a flicker of a moment. He saw another pair of eyes, Margaret's eyes, gentle and full of hope. He pushed the thought away quickly and adjusted his tie. The hall was so quiet that William could hear his own heartbeat. Steady and unyielding, he shifted in his chair, preparing to call for the next contestant. But then Emma surprised him. Instead of rising from the bench and leaving the stage in defeat, she straightened her back and looked at him with a determination he had not expected. Her small frame seemed to grow taller under the weight of his gaze. Her trembling fingers returned to the keys, not with the same song but with another, a choice of her own. The first notes of this second piece rang out clearer, more soulful than before. William's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. The melody stirred something deep inside him, something he thought he had buried long ago. His pen slipped from his fingers, clattering softly against the table, but he did not notice. His world had shifted in an instant. He knew that tune, he knew it in the marrow of his bones. It was Margaret's song, the one she had composed herself and played for him night after night when their love was young. A song no one else in the world should know. His hands clenched together as a memory rushed back uninvited. Margaret's smile as she sat at the piano, her delicate hands gliding over the keys, the way she would look at him after finishing the song, her eyes shining with affection. William Harding, the cold judge, suddenly could not breathe. The hall around him faded, the other judges blurred into shadows. All he could see was the girl at the piano, and all he could hear was the ghost of his wife's laughter hidden in those notes. For the first time in years, the cold mask cracked. Emma's fingers had just begun to glide over the keys when the sudden, sharp sound of the judge's voice cut through the hall. "Enough," he barked. His tone was so harsh, so commanding, that it felt like the walls of the grand room shook with his words. The notes Emma had been playing died instantly in the air, as if even the piano itself was frightened. Her hands froze above the keyboard, trembling. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. whispering among themselves. Some parents frowned. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Emma's cheeks flushed red, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She had been silenced before she even had a chance to begin. William Harding, the cold judge, leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table with a slow, deliberate rhythm. His face was expressionless, but his voice carried no mercy. "You're not ready," he said flatly. His words were like ice, sharp and cutting. "If this is the best you can give us, it is better you stop now." Emma felt as though the ground beneath her chair had disappeared. Her heart pounded in her chest, loud enough that she thought the entire hall could hear it. For months she had dreamed of this moment, practicing late into the night, whispering prayers before every meal that she would be strong enough to face the judges. But now all of that effort felt wasted, stolen from her with a few cold words. She lowered her head, staring at the black and white keys in front of her. They blurred through her tears. The piano, her dearest friend, suddenly looked like a stranger. The whispers in the audience grew louder, some pitying, some cruel. A contestant near the door chuckled quietly, trying to hide it. But Emma heard. The sound pierced her already fragile heart. William adjusted his glasses and reached for the bell that signaled the end of a contestant's turn. His hand hovered above it. He had done this countless times before. Ending performances he considered weak. It was routine for him, mechanical, a part of his cold reputation. He believed it was better to crush weak hopes early than let them grow into false dreams. But as his fingers brushed the bell, something unexpected happened. Emma raised her head. There was no smile on her face, no polite obedience. Instead, there was fire in her eyes, quiet but undeniable. She had been embarrassed, yes, but she would not leave that stage broken. Not yet. She straightened her back and placed her trembling hands once more on the piano. This time she ignored the sheet music sitting neatly on the stand. Instead, she played from memory, from heart. Her fingers moved slowly at first. Then with growing confidence, each note rang out clear and warm, filling the hall with a melody that did not come from the page, but from her soul. William's hand froze above the bell. His jaw tightened as he realized she had defied him. No one defied him. Contestants usually left the stage in tears or bowed nervously before scurrying away. But this girl was different. She refused to accept his dismissal. And that alone unsettled him. The music Emma played was unlike the careful, practiced tune she had started with. It carried weight, emotion, and a story. The audience, who moments ago had whispered with doubt, now fell into silence, every ear strained to catch the sound. Every heart leaned toward the melody as though it had been waiting for it. And then it struck William, the notes, the sequence, the rise and fall of the song. It was familiar, painfully familiar. He stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted to Emma's hands, then to her face. He knew this song. He had heard it countless nights in a different life, when his wife, Margaret, had filled their home with this very melody. His pen slipped again from his hand, clattering to the table. The other judges glanced at him in surprise, but William didn't notice. His cold mask faltered for the briefest second. He wanted to stop her again, to regain control, but the sound of the music pinned him to his chair. Every note pulled at the cracks in the wall he had built around his heart. Emma, unaware of the storm she had unleashed inside him, kept playing. Her eyes were closed now, her body swaying gently with the rhythm. She wasn't thinking about winning anymore, or even about impressing the judges. She was simply telling her story through music, pouring her fear, her courage, her hope into every note. When the final chord rang out, the hall was drenched in silence, not the heavy silence of shame, but the reverent silence that follows something extraordinary. Emma's hands lingered on the keys for a moment before she slowly pulled them back. Her chest rose and fell with the effort of what she had just done. She opened her eyes, expecting anger, perhaps even punishment. Instead, she saw the cold judge staring at her with an expression she could not understand. His lips parted slightly, his eyes shimmering with something that looked almost human, almost vulnerable. He did not ring the bell. He did not scold her. For the first time in years, William Harding, the man known as Unshakable, was left utterly frozen. Emma sat frozen for a moment after the last note faded, her chest rising and falling quickly. She had dared to play against the judge's command, and for a heartbeat she wondered if she had gone too far. The hall was silent, but it wasn't the silence of disapproval. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around every listener, holding them captive. The cold judge's eyes stayed fixed on her. His pen lay forgotten on the table. His hand no longer hovered over the bell, instead he sat there unmoving. Caught between anger at her defiance and something else he could not name, Emma felt his gaze pressing down on her like a weight, but she did not lower her head this time. Inside her something had shifted at first. She had only wanted to survive the audition, to play the notes correctly, to please the judges, but now, after being silenced so harshly, she realized she had nothing left to lose. If they rejected her, let it be after she had given them her truth, not after she had been cut short. Her fingers brushed the keys again. She whispered silently to herself, "This is my chance, my only chance," and then, with a courage she didn't know she had, she began to play once more. This time she chose carefully, not the prepared piece, not the song her teacher had drilled into her until it felt lifeless. She chose the song her mother had taught her, the one she had heard since childhood, the one that had carried her through both joy and sorrow. The first notes fell like drops of rain in the still hall, soft and fragile, but filled with meaning. Emma leaned into the piano, pouring herself into every movement. Her fear melted away as her confidence grew with each phrase. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the unexpected performance. The other judges exchanged glances, their pens pausing mid-stroke. This was not what they had expected from the shy, trembling girl who had walked in minutes earlier, and William Harding, the cold judge, sat stiffly in his chair. His jaw clenched as though he wanted to speak, but the music held him still. The melody reached into the parts of him he had locked away for years. The memories of late nights at home, Margaret smiling as she hummed this same tune, her hands dancing across the piano while he sat beside her, pretending to read his newspaper but secretly listening to every note. Emma's decision to keep playing was more than rebellion. It was survival. It was her way of saying, "I will not be erased. I will not leave without being heard." Her music carried that message into every corner of the hall. People who had come expecting another routine performance now found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. Some parents squeezed their children's hands, silently reminding them that bravery was as important as talent. Emma didn't notice their reactions. She was lost in the song, her mind drifting to her small home where she had practiced until her fingers ached, to her brother who had clapped for her no matter how many mistakes she made, to her mother who had sacrificed sleep and comfort just so Emma could chase this dream. All of it flowed into the notes. Every strike of the keys carried her story. At one point her hands shook, but she pressed on. She was no longer thinking about winning a medal or impressing strangers. She was fighting for herself, for her dignity, for her chance to show she was more than just a nervous girl in a plain dress. And in that fight, she found strength she never knew was inside her. William shifted in his seat. His fingers curled tightly around the edge of the table. He wanted to stop her again, to reassert his control, but he could not. Each time he tried to open his mouth, the music silenced him. His throat tightened. His chest ached with the weight of memories he thought had died with his wife. He hated the vulnerability he felt, but he could not look away. The other judges whispered softly to one another, one of them leaning closer to William. "Shall we let her finish?" he asked, almost uncertain. William did not answer. His eyes were locked on Emma. His silence spoke louder than words. He had frozen in place, trapped in the storm of emotions her defiance had created. Emma's final notes rang out, trembling but beautiful. She let her hands rest gently on the keys, as though she didn't want to break the moment. She looked up then, not timidly but with quiet determination. Her gaze swept the hall and then settled on William. She didn't smile, she didn't bow. She simply met his eyes and waited. The judge's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. For years he had built his reputation on coldness, on never letting anyone see weakness, but now, in front of an entire hall, a teenage girl had broken through his armor, and he didn't know how to hide it. His pen remained on the table, forgotten, his bell untouched. The audience erupted into applause, soft at first, then louder. It wasn't the polite clapping of people respecting a performance. It was the sound of people moved, people touched by something real. Emma sat still at the piano, her eyes shining with tears but her back straight. She had made her choice. She had refused to leave quietly, and now she had been heard. The sound that filled the hall was no longer just music, it was memory. It was the thread of a story that had begun years before Emma was even born. And yet here she was, weaving it back into life with her trembling hands. William Harding sat rigid in his chair, but inside he was unraveling. The melody Emma played wasn't just any tune. It was Margaret's song, the piece his late wife had composed herself. The notes were etched so deeply into his heart that he could never mistake them. Each rise and fall of the melody tugged at him, dragging him back into a time he had sworn to bury. He could see her so clearly. Margaret at the piano, her fingers dancing lightly over the keys, her laughter spilling into the air like sunlight through an open window. He could smell the faint lavender perfume she always wore. He could hear her voice teasing him when he pretended not to listen. "You love this song, don't you?" She would say, and though he never admitted it, she knew, and now years later in this cold hall filled with strangers, that same song rose again, not from Margaret's hands, but from a teenage girl who should have had no way of knowing it. William's throat tightened. He pressed his palm against the table as if to steady himself, but nothing could ground him. The past had broken through Emma, unaware of the storm she had stirred, kept playing. Her eyes were closed, her expression soft and focused. She was not just performing. She was reliving every emotion she had tied to this song. To her, this melody was her mother's comfort, the lullaby that had carried her through nights of fear, the sound that reminded her she was not alone even when the world felt too heavy. The audience listened with rapt attention, some leaning forward as though the music itself was pulling them closer. Parents held their breath. Children sat still without fidgeting. Even the ushers by the door forgot their duties for a moment. The atmosphere was charged, not with competition, but with something far greater, a shared reverence for what was happening. William's fellow judges exchanged curious glances. One whispered, "She's remarkable." Another nodded slowly, jotting down a rare note of praise, but William could not write. His hand shook too much to hold the pen. For the first time in years, he felt his mask cracking. His reputation as the cold judge was slipping, and he didn't know how to stop it. As the song deepened, William's memories came harder. He remembered the night Margaret had first played it for him. They had been newly married, the room small but warm. The lamp on the table flickered as she smiled at him. "I wrote this for us," she said. He had scoffed at first, pretending to be uninterested. But as the music filled the room, he had fallen silent. Listening, feeling after she died, he had locked that song away in the back of his mind. He couldn't bear to hear it, couldn't risk the flood of pain it would bring. For years he refused to attend concerts at all. When he finally returned as a judge, he told himself it was just work. That music was nothing more than notes on a page. But now here was this girl, breaking through all his defenses with the very song that symbolized both his greatest love and his greatest loss. Emma leaned into the final passage, her fingers moving with more confidence now. She could feel the hall breathing with her. Each note shimmered in the air, delicate but unyielding. She had chosen this song because it spoke to her heart. She had no idea that it also belonged to someone else, someone who sat only a few feet away. William's eyes burned. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the tears that threatened to fall. He had not cried in years, not even at Margaret's funeral. He had sworn to remain strong, to never let the world see him broken. Yet here he was, undone by the courage of a girl who refused to leave the stage in silence. When Emma reached the song's climax, the hall seemed to tremble. Her hands struck the keys with passion, not fear. The sound soared upward, filling the high ceiling, echoing in every corner. William gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The melody wrapped around him like Margaret's arms once had, tender and unrelenting. The other judges stopped writing altogether. They simply listened, their expressions softening. Even they could feel it. This wasn't just a performance. It was something alive, something that touched beyond skill or practice. It was rare, precious, unforgettable. And when the final note fell, ringing like a last whispered goodbye, the silence that followed was unbearable. William sat there, his heart pounding against his ribs. His hands trembled openly now. He no longer cared who saw. Emma slowly opened her eyes, her face shining with sweat and tears. She looked at the piano as if it were her closest friend, then turned her gaze toward the judge's table. Her eyes met William's, and though she didn't know why, she saw something break inside him. He was no longer the cold man who had barked at her to stop. He was someone else, someone wounded, someone human. For the first time since the audition began, Emma did not feel small in front of him. She felt seen. The hall around William faded into a blur. The red velvet chairs, the shining chandeliers, even the girl at the piano began to dissolve from his mind. All he could hear was the melody, wrapping itself around him like an old friend, like a voice he thought he had lost forever. And with every note he was pulled backward, into a time before the grief, before the silence. He was young again, Standing in the small living room of his first home with Margaret, the piano had been second-hand, its surface scratched, its keys yellowed with age, but she loved it as though it were gold. He could still see her there, sitting gracefully on the bench, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her laughter filling the air. "It's not perfect," she said, tapping one of the stiff keys with a smile. "But neither are we. That's what makes it ours." William remembered the way he had rolled his eyes, pretending to be practical. A new couch would have been smarter, he had teased. She had laughed again, playing a playful run of notes in response. "Music will last longer than a couch, you'll see." And she had been right. The melody Emma played now was the same one Margaret had written in those days, a song that belonged to them, born from their love and their shared life. Margaret had composed it late at night, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, humming softly as William sat nearby pretending to read the newspaper. He remembered how she would glance at him, waiting for his reaction, and how he always pretended not to care, but secretly he did. He cared more than he could ever admit. The memory shifted, and suddenly he was in their kitchen, Margaret humming the song as she cooked, the smell of garlic and butter filling the air. She would wipe her hands on a towel, sit at the piano for just a moment and play the tune again, even if it meant dinner burned slightly. "One day," she whispered to him, "someone else will play this song too, and they'll feel what we felt." At the time, William had chuckled, brushing it off, never imagining that prophecy would come true, never imagining it would happen in this way. The flashback moved again, faster this time, pulling him toward the darker days. Margaret sitting at the piano with her hair tied back, her face pale but still determined. Her illness had begun to steal her strength, but not her spirit even as her hands trembled. She played the song, pressing each note as though it were a promise. "Don't let the music die with me," she whispered one night. Her eyes glassy with tears, William had turned away, unable to bear it. "Don't talk like that," he had said sharply, pretending he didn't hear, pretending she would always be there. The last memory came like a knife. Margaret lying in bed, too weak to rise. The piano sat silent in the corner of the room. Waiting for her touch, she reached for his hand, her voice barely audible. "Play it for me." Just once, she had begged. William had shaken his head. "You know I don't play," he replied. His voice had cracked, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't face the piano, couldn't face the music. When she passed away that night, the house fell into silence, a silence that had followed him ever since. And now, years later, that silence was broken. Emma's hands brought Margaret's song back into the world. William gripped the table as tears threatened to spill. He had locked these memories away for so long, refusing to let anyone see the wound that never healed. But the music ripped open every wall he had built, leaving him raw, exposed, vulnerable. The flashbacks blurred into one another. Margaret's laughter, her song, her touch, the empty bed, the silent piano. William's eyes burned. He lifted his hand to his face quickly as though wiping his glasses, but his fingers brushed away tears instead. For the first time in years, he cried. Emma finished the piece, and the last note lingered in the hall like a ghost refusing to leave. The silence that followed was filled with William's heartbeat. Heavy and uneven, he stared at the girl, but he did not see her. He saw Margaret sitting at the piano, smiling at him through the music, whispering, "Do you hear me still?" William's chest tightened. He wanted to stand, to shout, to stop the storm inside him, but he couldn't. He sat frozen, trapped between past and present, caught in the cruel beauty of memory for once. The cold judge was not in control. He was a husband again, a man broken by love and loss. The audience did not know what he was reliving. They only saw his stony face beginning to tremble, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes glistened. They whispered among themselves, confused and amazed. Was this really the same man known for his icy heart? Emma, still sitting at the piano, finally opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't know the story behind his stare, but she felt the weight of it. She felt as though the song had reached him in a place no one else could touch. She lowered her gaze respectfully, not smiling, not celebrating, simply waiting for William. The flashbacks faded slowly, leaving him shaken and unsteady. The hall returned. The girl returned. The judges and audience returned. But nothing was the same anymore. The song had unlocked the door he had kept locked for too long. The memories were alive again, and with them, his grief, his love, his humanity. The last notes of Emma's song floated in the air like feathers, light and fragile, refusing to fall for a moment. The hall was silent, so silent that even the sound of breathing felt too loud. Then something unexplainable happened. The atmosphere itself changed. Emma sat frozen at the piano, her small shoulders rising and falling with every shaky breath. She had poured everything she had into the keys. Her fear, her shame, her courage, her hope, and now she waited. Not knowing if she had won or lost, she didn't even care anymore. All she wanted was to be heard, truly heard. The audience, who had come expecting an ordinary audition, sat in stunned silence. Some leaned forward, their eyes glistening. Others clasped their hands as though afraid to break the spell. A mother in the back wiped tears from her cheeks, pulling her child closer. A boy who had been whispering jokes earlier now stared wide-eyed at the stage, unable to look away. Emma's defiance, her decision to keep playing even when told to stop, had changed something in the air. This was no longer just a competition. It had become something much larger, a moment people knew they would remember long after they left the hall. And at the center of it all sat Judge William Harding, the man known as cold and unshakable. His hands gripped the table so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes shimmered with tears he tried to hide. The music had cracked him open, exposing the grief he had buried for years. He had not asked for it, he had not wanted it, but he could not fight it. Margaret's song had returned, and it lived again through Emma's hands. The other judges noticed the change in him. One leaned closer, whispering, "Are you all right, William?" But he did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on Emma. It wasn't anger anymore, nor judgment. It was something softer, more fragile, as if he were afraid that if he blinked, the song would vanish and take Margaret with it. The audience sensed the shift too. They could feel the tension between the girl and the cold judge. Though they didn't understand it fully, they saw the way his usually hard face had softened, the way his shoulders had lowered as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Whispers rippled quietly through the hall. What's happening? Why isn't he stopping her? Look at him, he's crying. Emma, still seated at the piano, finally lifted her head and looked out at the crowd. She saw the faces, the tears, the awe, and her own heart swelled with something she had never felt before. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about connection, about proving that music was more than notes on a page. It was a language that could reach the deepest parts of people. For William, the hall no longer felt like a competition stage. It felt like his living room years ago, when Margaret played for him. It felt like love, like loss, like home. The air was thick with memory and meaning, and he could not hide behind his cold reputation anymore. He had been exposed, and strangely he no longer wanted to hide. The other judges put down their pens, realizing there was nothing left to write. They too were caught in the spell. One smiled softly, shaking her head as though to say, "We've just witnessed something rare." The head of the panel, usually strict about rules, leaned back with a sigh. His stern face melted into quiet admiration. When Emma finally let her hands fall to her lap, the silence that followed was deafening. The audience did not erupt into applause right away. They held the silence, unwilling to let the moment go too soon. It was as if the hall itself wanted to honor what had just happened, as if clapping would break something sacred. Then slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. The sound grew louder, swelling into thunderous applause. People stood from their seats not because it was polite, but because they could not contain themselves. A standing ovation, rare for an audition, filled the room. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. She had expected rejection, maybe even laughter, but never this. Never the feeling of hundreds of strangers rising to their feet for her. Her mother, sitting in the audience with trembling hands, covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She whispered, "That's my girl." Her brother, barely tall enough to see over the row in front of him, jumped up and down, clapping until his palms stung. But the loudest silence still belonged to William Harding. He did not clap, he could not. His hands remained on the table. Shaking, his face was wet with tears. He didn't care who saw. The man who had silenced countless performers, who had built a reputation as unshakable, was now broken open in front of them all. Yet in that brokenness, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, alive. Emma bowed her head slightly, humbled by the applause. But when she looked again at the judges' table, her eyes met William's once more. This time there was no fear in her. She saw him for what he was, not a monster, not a cold wall of authority, but a man with a story. a man touched by the same song that had carried her through life. And in that unspoken moment, the atmosphere of the entire hall changed forever. The applause roared through the hall like a wave, crashing against the walls, rising higher with each clap. Emma stood slowly from the piano bench, her knees shaking. She bowed her head once, then twice, her cheeks flushed with disbelief. She had dreamed of this moment but never imagined it would feel like this. Her heart beat wildly, not with fear this time, but with something close to joy. The audience remained on their feet, clapping, whistling, cheering. Some shouted her name, others wiped their eyes. It wasn't just respect for her talent. It was admiration for her courage. Everyone had seen what she did. A young girl who refused to be silenced, who played with heart when everything was against her, and in that defiance, she had awakened something deep in every soul present. But Emma's eyes drifted back to the judges' table. Her applause came not from the audience, but from within. What mattered most was what they would say, and above all, what he would say. The cold judge who had cut her off. William Harding sat in silence. The other judges were already nodding, already scribbling their highest marks. One leaned forward and smiled. "Outstanding," she whispered to herself. Another clapped softly, even though it wasn't customary for judges to do so. But William did none of this. He sat perfectly still, his hands trembling slightly against the table. His eyes, red-rimmed and wet, stayed fixed on Emma. The hall waited, sensing that something important was about to happen. The applause softened, then faded one by one. People lowered their hands and returned to their seats. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the man at the center of the judges' table, the one whose word carried more weight than anyone else's. William stood slowly. His chair scraped against the wooden floor with a sharp sound that echoed through the silence. He adjusted his jacket with stiff hands, but it was not the gesture of a cold, unyielding man. It was the gesture of someone steadying himself. Gathering courage, the audience leaned forward. The other judges waited. Emma held her breath for a long moment. William said nothing. He simply looked at her, the girl who had dared to challenge him, who had reached inside him with a song he thought was lost forever. His lips parted, but no words came. He swallowed, his throat tight. His reputation told him to remain cold, to give only a short critique, but his heart, newly awakened, refused to let him. At last his voice came, quiet but strong enough to fill the hall. "Young lady," he began. The words trembled slightly, as though he hadn't spoken from his heart in many years. "What you did here today was more than a performance." He paused, his eyes glistening. "You gave us music, not notes. You gave us honesty, you gave us courage." The hall remained silent. Not daring to interrupt, William continued, his voice breaking. "I was wrong to stop you. I was wrong to doubt you. You showed us all what music truly is, and a gift, a truth, a bridge between souls." He lowered his head for a moment, his shoulders heavy. "And for that, you have my respect?" Gasps spread through the hall. The cold judge, the man who never praised, never softened, had just admitted fault, had just praised a contestant openly. The other judges exchanged stunned looks. The audience sat in awe, and Emma, standing on stage, felt tears spill down her cheeks. Her mother pressed her hand to her chest in the audience, whispering, "He said it, he finally said it." Her brother jumped up again, clapping wildly, his small voice shouting, "That's my sister." Emma bowed her head deeply, not just as a performer, but as someone who had been recognized. Truly recognized, she had not only earned a score, she had earned something greater, the respect of a man who never gave it, a man who had once silenced her but now stood as her witness. William looked at her one last time, and in that gaze was something no one else could understand. He saw Margaret. He saw his wife smiling through the music. He felt her presence in the hall, warm and alive. For years he had lived in silence, hiding behind coldness, but Emma's defiance, her song, had broken through, and for the first time he felt grateful. The hall erupted into applause once more. Louder than before, Emma smiled through her tears, and though she knew the competition was not over, in her heart she had already won. She had proven herself not by perfection but by bravery, by refusing to let her voice be taken from her. William sat down slowly, his face softened. The mask of coldness gone, he leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief second, listening to the echo of the song still alive inside him. It was not just Emma who had been changed that day. It was him too, and though he would never admit it fully to the world, he knew he had been given a gift, one he thought he would never feel again. Emma left the stage with her head held high, not just a contestant anymore, but a storyteller, a survivor, a musician. And in the quiet corners of the hall, people whispered to one another, "Did you see the judge? Did you see what she did?" It was a story they would carry with them, a moment that would live beyond the notes, beyond the walls of that hall. And so, a cold judge and a brave girl shared a song, and in that song, they both found something they thought was gone forever. Respect, memory, healing, hope, all carried on the wings of music.